Hello, lovely listeners. Happy New Week and welcome back to another episode of the Kind Regards podcast. I am your host, Zamiwe Mwape, and today we'll be delving into a topic that has been the subject of many post-pandemic articles, memes, and TikToks. Quiet quitting and the lazy girl job. If you're thinking, Zamiwe, what does that even mean? Don't worry, I've got you. An article from Forbes describes quiet quitting as the concept whereby employees put forth the least amount of effort possible to keep their paychecks. The rationale for this workplace approach is that work is not the most important thing in people's lives, and they shouldn't put in extra time without extra compensation. And they should have the freedom to pursue other endeavors outside of employment. On the other hand, Business Insider describes the lazy girl job as a term that generally refers to a low-stress job that pays fairly well. These trends have come forth post-pandemic. The pandemic, which was a rude shock to all of us and a reminder as to how short and precious life is. Both these trends, however, have resulted in the words millennial and Gen Z being synonymous with the term lazy and entitled, particularly in professional spaces. Conversely, I think these trends are really about the desire for flexibility and work-life balance during times of seemingly unprecedented levels of stress, anxiety, and burnout. I say seemingly, as perhaps these matters were just not as much of a focus area in previous generations or times. Before we dive deep into today's topic, I want to emphasize that I am not a mental health professional, and the information provided on this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. While I strive to offer insights on various topics, including mental wellness, it's important to remember that if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health issues, I strongly recommend seeking guidance from a qualified mental health professional or a healthcare provider. It's 2023, and my hope is that there is more awareness and less stigma around seeking help. Now, let's get into this by first clarifying what the objective of this episode is, which is simply to discuss the root cause of these emerging trends, such as the lazy girl jobs and quiet quitting, the associated opportunity costs, as well as to spur a discussion on handling stress and burnout. A mental health survey conducted by Deloitte in 2023, which gathered the views of over 22,000 people from 44 countries, showed that 39% of millennials and 46% of Gen Zs felt stressed out most or all of the time. That's a big number. A key theme I have observed from discussions with peers and friends from various backgrounds is that people from this demographic are not willing to offer up their lives for money without having the time, energy, and mental space to enjoy said money and the social structures around them, such as family and friends. I've even heard people say things like, then what are we working for? It's not worth it, right? Now, given that we live in a capitalist society, taking on a lazy girl job or quiet quitting at your job may come at the cost of career progression and therefore may impact your earning capacity, which could also potentially impact what your path to financial freedom looks like, if that is something you desire. Quiet quitting could also negatively impact your professional reputation, which may or may not affect your future professional prospects. While there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to these things, it is important to critically assess what you value, the lifestyle you're looking to have now and in the future, and which approach aligns best with your goals. And of course, just because you have a lazy girl job today does not mean you're committed to it for life. And similarly, just because you have a fast-paced, demanding job today does not mean you must live out the rest of your productive years that way. Context and self-awareness are key when it comes to deciding which work lifestyle suits you at any given point. Now, let's touch on some mechanisms for managing stress and burnout. Number 1, take time off. No, seriously, if you're an employee, use your leave days and recharge. The company will not crumble without you. And if it does, perhaps it's time to bring up a conversation around succession planning. We've all heard stories of people carrying forward copious amounts of leave days or simply forfeiting them because they felt they could not take advantage of their entitlements. That cannot be a good thing for both you and your employer. And if you're an entrepreneur, Vusi Tembekwayo, one of the most well-known African speakers of our time, says, and I'm paraphrasing here, if you cannot step away from your business for 90 days without it coming to a halt, you're not an entrepreneur, you are self-employed. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but perhaps it would be beneficial to start thinking about putting a contingency structure in place. What would happen to your income if you were forced to take a break from working, say, due to illness? You know what they say, if you don't take time to rest your body will force you to take the time. Number 2, Take care of your physical wellness. I know this is probably the most obvious and cliche point of all wellness conversations. But as someone who has suffered from stress and burnout, I can personally attest that exercise and a reasonably healthy diet make a world of a difference in my mental and physical state. Note that I say reasonably healthy diet because I do not believe in eliminating entire food groups unless they make you sick. When I invest the time and effort in my physical wellness, my mood is just better, The flowers smell sweeter, the sun shines brighter, and there's a pep in my step. You get my drift. Thirdly, consider accessing mental health services or counseling if you're struggling. If you're employed, find out what mental health perks your employer or insurance provider have in place and use them. Several employers have insurance plans that cover mental health services, so your HR department should be able to advise on this. And if you're financially strapped, it's also worth investigating whether there are any free services you can access in your area. This can even be in the form of church counseling. Number 4, revisit your routine and productivity systems. I'll be honest and say this is probably one of the heaviest lifts for me to implement personally. However, I have found that this leads to better productivity and really helps alleviate my feelings of anxiety, stress, and those dreadful Sunday scaries. If you know, you know. If you haven't already, which I'm sure you have, because honestly, at this rate, one person or the other has told me they are reading this book. Read Atomic Habits. It breaks down making incremental life improvements in a way that does not feel overwhelming. It's also taught me that consistency goes further than intensity ever will. And last but not least, plan a sabbatical or career break. If you haven't already listened to our episode on this, go and listen to episode 1, where I discuss planning your sabbatical or career break with Janet Mwanza. It may take you a couple of years to get the ball rolling on this, but that conversation will help you see why it's worth it. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Please chime in with your thoughts on lazy girl jobs, quiet quitting, and how best you manage or avoid stress and burnout. In closing, let us all remember that in our quest for success, we must not neglect our well-being. Try to recognize the signs of burnout and prioritize self-care. Your worth is not solely defined by your productivity. It's about finding balance and embracing a life that's both productive and fulfilling. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Kind Regards podcast. I wish you an amazing week ahead. Catch you on the next one. Kind regards, Zamiwe.